What so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming. And the rugged red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
I can breathe. Breathe the name of it. I can breathe shit.
Good morning, Cayman. Happy Friday. I was just trying to find a couple more additional videos because I think honestly, it's hard to argue with things when you see them in video format. So I want to say good morning to everyone. It is a beautiful Friday. We're all very fortunate to be alive. I think some of us are definitely in a better position than others. There have been a couple very unsettling, I think, things that have happened even since this incident with I'm just trying to post some videos here. Even since this incident with George Floyd, I think the police have demonstrated in America that they actually don't care very much about people's rights at all. And in fact, the Supreme Court is now looking at a landmark case and about revisiting a case, which is very unusual for the Supreme Court to do that in light of recent events and what's been happening. So we're going to take a look at that this morning. We're hopeful to have a guest on the program. She's Caymanian and she is biracial and she's lived both in the Cayman Islands and the United States of America. So hopefully she will be able to join us this morning as well. Now, on last night's show, I showed a few photos of some young persons who are doing this George Floyd challenge, where they basically show their ignorance and their prejudices and the fact that they think that it's amusing that this man lost his life in such a way. So they're making fun of it by putting their friends on the ground and then putting their knee to their necks. What is interesting is last night someone sent me an additional photo of apparently it's trending, like it's a thing that people are doing. It's been all over the news, which is so disturbing. But someone sent me an additional photo of some persons doing it, And I'm really disappointed to say that, sometimes we try to excuse prejudiced behavior because, oh, this person's young and they're stupid and they just haven't lived life long enough. These are the excuses that we make up in our heads to um, to explain, this behavior. But it appears that, listen, racism is not only deep seated in our communities, but it's demonstrable by, so many different people, so many different ages. I mean, look at this couple. Paula lives in Oregon. Um, Obviously not uh, a young person. She looks like she's a senior citizen. She's originally from the UK, it says here, according to her Facebook profile. And they actually took the time to go out and purchase a shirt that says, I can't breathe. The man that she's in a relationship put the shirt on. And then they demonstrated, and it looks like they're making fun and jokes about it. They demonstrated, I guess the humor in this that they're finding. Um, and then notice at the top where she says Asian life matters. I mean, that is so disrespectful and so disgusting. And I see here that Paula, it looks like Paula owns some kind of a business. And I really hope that, you know, we may feel sometimes like we are powerless and what we can do and the things that we are able to accomplish in this fight. But every little thing helps. So she claims that she is a mother, a small business owner, and a mother of two amazing kids and Glammy to one awesome grandson. I can't imagine what she's taught her grandchildren. But at the end of the day, um, by all means, I hope that people are paying attention to the fact that she owns a home spray foam and installation business and that that business does not deserve anyone's money. And if you want to take a stance against people like this, then by all means, don't patronize business owners like this. You know, it's just beyond disturbing. It's just absolutely disgusting. So she has been called out on social media. Um, and yeah, this is Paula. Don't know who Paula is, but she's clearly got some issues. Um, so that's what's trending on social media this morning. The other thing that's trending is there are a couple of videos. I want to show you guys some of these. I'm trying to pull them up here this morning of straight up police brutality. There's no other way to describe, what the police do. And I think every single time we sugarcoat it and we call it something else that it isn't, we try to give the police wrong right when they are obviously wrong, we become part of the problem as well. So I want to show you guys a few things here that are shocking. There's a video that we're going to talk about here in a second where people around the world have always felt like America was the epitome of the moral compass for right and wrong. Like they police the world. So we think that because they police the world, they're always in the right. And there could be, honestly, nothing farther from the truth. So look at this, yet another example of the police just really showing their real colors here. I don't have the details of which city this is, but a peaceful protester has his daughter and she looks like she has on a little superhero costume on his shoulder. And the police, this one particular officer in the middle, is actually aiming at his face with, I'm assuming this is one of the rubber pellet guns. And this is the image that this young lady will now have ingrained in her head, that this is what the police represent, this is what they do. And it's disturbing, it's beyond disturbing. And it's one of the reasons why I continually say America will not, unfortunately, get any better. I mean, I find it hard to see how they are going to resolve these types of issues when they appear to be so incredibly deep seated in the American psyche. And, just it's just shocking. But this apparently is who they are. There's a number of Instagram videos with people being arrested and being assaulted and tear gassed by the police. And these are peaceful protesters, I should say, who have actually not done anything wrong. So once again, police in America have demonstrated that they have some serious issues. They need to do some serious retraining. And I want to have a look at what the European counterparts have to say about this, because I think it's so interesting what they have been saying. So I do want to pull up a video here. So just give me 1 second while I do that. This is the Euro News, and this is what they've had to say about the situation in America. So just give me 1 quick second here, because I think it does summarize quite neatly some of what we've been talking about. So good morning to all of you. We have Morna, Jamilia, Svetlana, I think that's how you pronounce it. Good morning to you. Olivia, Dimitrik, John, thank you so much for tuning in. Leandra says, good morning, Miss Sandra. Have a blessed day. Thank you. Good morning to Joy. Hi, Tamara. John says, this is why it's important not to copy models from here or there and be ourselves. Yes, but it looks like even ourselves are might not be the best of ourselves. So let's just watch this video. I'm going to bring this up here. Give me 1 second so that we can have a quick look at what people around the world are thinking and saying about this, about what's happening in America. Okay, so just give me 1 second here. So this is a Euro News article that I came across. Looks like the video quality is not the best. Just give me 1 second.
Nearly 9 minutes, a white police officer put his whole weight on the man's back.
Okay, let me actually pull up the YouTube screen. And I think that might be a little bit easier to view. So give me a second here.
Nearly 9 minutes, a white police officer put his whole weight on the man's back and the man's neck. We saw a murder happening in real time on television. It's also the social media generation. People can send information around the world very quickly, very instantaneously in ways they couldn't before. But also it's the fact that America, for generations, has presented itself, in Ronald Reagan, the former president's words, as this shining city on the hill, the exceptional, wonderful experiment, the melting pot, the likes of which other countries should try and imitate. Remember, years ago, we used to call the USA the world's policeman, the global policeman. So if there was unrest in China, unrest in Russia, in some parts of Africa, the USA would wag its finger and threaten to beat that country with an economic stick or even a military stick, as we saw in Iraq. That doesn't happen anymore. Why? Well, because President Trump said America first when he was elected nearly 4 years ago, but also that moral authority has been on the wane over the last few years, and other countries are no longer as afraid as they were to say to America, we are not impressed by you and we are going to call you out. Even to the extent of the Chinese saying Black Lives Matter, the Iranians saying Black Lives Matter, despite the fact that they have ethnic diversity problems in their own countries. They see America looking weak, America not looking strong, America turning in on itself. And people are saying, it's time that you change instead of telling everybody else around the world they need to change.
Just quickly, how loud is the voice of the international protester? Do you think international protesters will have an effect or an impact on what happens in the US?
I think it will help to galvanize the people in the US and show them that they are not alone. Because for people in China, in New Zealand, all over the European Union, and in Africa and Latin America to say this to the United States, it will make the American leaders wonder, what have we become? Is this the end of the American dream? Nearly 9 minutes, a white police officer put his
Okay. So we saw your news, that guy sharing that the international press and the international outcry on this has been very, very loud. People are no longer believing America when they're saying that they are a melting pot society, that they are the epitome of what we should all seek to emulate, because the truth of the matter is they never have been. And it's been a bit of a facade that has been created, a political facade, if you will, that has been created and perpetrated by leaders and even by the media. The US doesn't come anywhere close to being a true melting pot at all. And so, even here in the Cayman Islands, when we share video footage, there was an elderly gentleman who was pushed down by the police. Again, a peaceful protester. He was pushed down by the police and essentially knocked out. And he actually was bleeding from the ear when they left him. No indication whatsoever if he was still alive, even. And I saw one officer sort of hesitated slightly, but didn't really do much beyond that in terms of assisting this old man that they had pushed down. And if you need the link, it's on our Facebook page. That's disturbing. And he is an elderly white man. So their position basically is, if you are protesting, if you are in support of Black Lives Matter, we don't care if you're peacefully protesting. Your life is now at jeopardy. We will use military force, we will use police force on you to squash your protests. And I think that we all, at the heart of being human beings, understand the importance of the ability in a democracy, especially, to be able to protest and to be able to make our voices be heard through that. Here in the Cayman Islands recently, our people seem to be finding, we've got little squeaky voices here, but we seem to be finding them. So we saw, for example, with the what was the name of it? The port referendum. There was a protest in relation to that. There was a more recent protest in relation to removing the Speaker of the House, Mr. McKeever Bush, after he assaulted a woman. So we've been having little minute protests here and there. There was one at Smith Macadere, Smith Cove Beach, protesting the development of that facility as well. So we're finding our voices. It seems very slow to come, but I guess better late than never. but yeah, this is what is happening around the world. So on our social media page, I think it was on our Instagram page, we have been posting, just like in our Facebook page, we are supportive of the hashtag Black Lives Matter. And I see where some people are like, why is this your business? Why is Cayman getting involved in this? And I'm thinking to myself, how can we question, right? Whether something is our business or not when it's a matter of humanity. Like, I don't get how Cayman and Caymanians believe that they can sit on the sidelines and do nothing, say nothing, and support absolutely no causes, uh, no humanitarian causes, no environmental causes, nothing, and not see how ultimately that impacts us. It's almost like we have a very limited view of the world. And we believe that this little, what's our square mileage here in this island? I don't know, 20 something square miles or whatever, however big we are. We think that this is it. That there's nothing beyond us, there's nothing beyond who we are. And so we live in a bubble of our own creation, of our own making, believing that somehow we're going to be okay and we're going to survive, and not ever have to struggle. Which, if you live in the Cayman Islands, you already know that that's a lie. That simply isn't true. So I'm often a bit flabbergasted, um, and shocked at when people respond in that particular way. Because I'm thinking, how can you not raise your voice? How can you not see the importance of what it is that we're doing here? Of the fight. Even if you're lending your voice in a very subtle way, it's just your voice. We're not out there in the streets protesting. Everywhere else in the world, there are cities that are protesting. The UK, Denmark, all over Europe, people have galvanized and they've started to protest in support of the hashtag, Black Lives Matter, because this is just egregious to the core. And so, thank you, Aliana, 76 square miles. I was just like, whatever. But you know that's like nothing. That's a drop in the bucket in terms of how big we are, and we're only 65,000 people, and we're just so incredibly strong. But it's we sit back and we're like, oh well, we don't want any part of that. We don't want anything to do with that. That's not our battle. That's how we think in our heads. It has nothing to do with us. And yet it has everything to do with us. Because even here on this little island, we've already started the conversation. We see time and time again how we are impacted by this. There is racism on this island. So if we can't say Black Lives Matter anywhere in the world, in the US, UK, Europe, whatever, will we ever get to the point where we look at our own situation and say, Black Lives Matter here? Are we willing to accept that we have both homegrown and imported racism? I have to ask the question. Aliana says we aren't dictated by morals, only money. And that's a sad indictment here on us in the Cayman Islands. So I want to share another video here with you guys. Sorry, let me just preface it and tell you what this one is about. So this one is, again, yet another example of the police just run amok. I mean, you would think if you were living in America right now, you would honestly think that the American military, the American police officers would be like, listen, one of our own screwed up and put us in this position. The entire country is in turmoil. So we're going to help to calm the situation. We've seen a few instances of police officers standing with the protesters, but by and large, they themselves continue to be the problem. So they continue to demonstrate the fact that there is something systemically wrong with the police in the United States of America. And I'm going to show you a series. I've got 3 videos here. I'm trying to get the one with the elderly gentleman pulled up as well, because I think a lot of you have not seen it. And this is just demonstrative of what we're talking about. So the first video is one of their own who happens to be an African-American female officer having to step in and step between her own co-workers, basically, other police, and the young man and say, no, 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 no. You can't touch him. You need to stop this. And I'm sure that in that moment, as a mother, she was probably only thinking to protect somebody else's child. You know, so let's have a look at this video first. So again, that's quite shocking. And then we have some additional videos here of them dealing with and handling protesters. Again, examples of what not to do. Like seriously, what not to do.
My name is Miles Carter. I live in the town of Tonawanda. I don't live in the city of Buffalo. My mosque is over on Genesee Street.
Okay, in that last video, you can see a gentleman there giving an interview to one of the local media. He actually had his hands up, clearly, you know, not doing anything except trying to speak to the media. And again, the police came and arrested him. I don't know exactly what the charge is for or what they're going to allege that he did, but everyone is just like, what is going on in America? They have lost the plot. But I think the bigger consideration here is, unfortunately, this is nothing new. Unfortunately, it is nothing new. And they lost the plot a very, very long time ago. So I have finally located the one with the elderly gentleman, and I'm going to play that here in a second. We're still hoping that our guest will be able to join us. We've not heard from her yet this morning. So we'll see how that goes. You know, people are having a really hard time with this. I must tell you that we had another young lady who was going to come onto the program. She tends to be extremely vocal, but you know, people get very engaged on social media in this discussion. And that can be very draining for individuals. And I think in her case, maybe she got a little bit too involved. And she's a very passionate young lady. And she obviously has taken, you know, a very specific position on this, being someone who's biracial and who sees the ills of what's happening, not just in the Cayman Islands, but in the US where she currently is located. And so she wanted to speak up, but I think that her involvement in what's been happening has drained her emotionally and mentally, and she was having a bit of a physical reaction to that entire situation. So people are having to take mental health days because they're so stressed out over what has transpired. And imagine the irony of that is that none of them are related to George Floyd. None of us have lost a father. He had a 6-year-old child, apparently. None of us have lost a brother, an uncle, a cousin. So if we're feeling stressed out about what's happening and what we see on social media, the comments that we see, and so on, imagine how his family must feel. You know, those who knew him, who were close to him. Let's read some of your comments. Carrie Ann says you look well rested. I'm actually not, so I appreciate that compliment. I woke up this morning thinking, is there such a thing as ever feeling well rested? Because I wake up tired. I think I just need to start going to bed earlier at night, so I know that I just don't get enough sleep. But thank you, Carrie Ann, for that. Good morning, Irvelyn. Leandra says it's really sad to see how police are treating humans like that. Not good. It's really heartbreaking. Ingrid, good morning. Tashika says the ones who are asking is part of the problem too. We get involved for the same reason England, Canada, Jamaica, and the rest of the world are getting involved. And Tashika, I could not agree with you more. In fact, Jamaica has taken a stance on this topic. I was seeing something about this recently, I think it was yesterday, about them becoming part of the Black Lives Matter movement, because I mean, we're all in this together. So Tashika, I couldn't agree with you more. We are, my apologies, this is our history. As Black people, we are part of the solution, and perhaps to some extent we have been part of the problem because we refuse to acknowledge what is right in front of us. And so that is problematic. Human rights violations all over the world cannot be ignored. And at the core of what this is a human rights violation when you continually take the lives of people just because of the color of their skin, and you give them a different treatment and a different set of rules as police officers that they will abide by just because of the color of their skin. So absolutely, I think that, you know, it's imperative that we all stand together and we all unify on this issue. And in fact, we hear stories here of alleged police brutality. People who've been arrested who said, you know, they haven't been killed yet, but the police mashed them up. The police, you know, did all sorts of things to them. In fact, just this week, there was a report released by the Ombudsman's office after they reviewed the incident that happened about a month ago of a police chase. And they actually said that that was wrong. The way in which that officer handled that police chase was wrong. And so now the police commissioner here in the Cayman Islands has said that he will accept their findings. What that means, none of us really knows. What disciplinary action will be taken against that officer, none of us know. You know, since Hurricane Ivan, I have been talking about the need to find alternatives to police chases, especially in an island this small. And now that we have 2 helicopters to be able to use, you kind of think, how hard can it be to actually track someone down? Well, apparently these criminals on a regular basis are outsmarting the police, because up to yesterday, they were in the Belford Estates area, I think early this morning actually, looking for, this was at 3:23 a.m., the police in Belford Estates looking in people's parked cars with flashlights looking for a wanted felon by the name of Simon Newball. And, they went to his house to arrest him and were unsuccessful in that. He's gotten away and he's been on the run, well, over a week now. So I guess even with the best technology, they can't find people, but they continue to search for him. And so the ombudsman, Sally Hermiston, has expressed concerns over the police's use of force in this incident in April. And as you guys remember, we had photos, we had video footage. And again, it is a good thing when citizens see something going on, and yes, they pull out their cameras and they record it. Because but for that evidence, we would be having a theoretical discussion about what happened. You have eyewitnesses claiming, no, 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 this is how it went down. This is what happened. And other eyewitnesses would be saying, no, but that's not what happened. This is what happened. It becomes very, very difficult to argue with a piece of video. Just like in the George Floyd situation, you had multiple videos that demonstrated at different angles exactly what was going on. And I think the primary video, an actual 17-year-old child pretty much took that video. She's not even yet an adult. And she took that video, and that has allowed everyone, the entire world, to see the 8 minutes and 45 seconds of terror that this man sustained. This allows people to see with their own two eyes him saying, I can't breathe, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. This allows people to see how he was calling out for his deceased mother. So this isn't a second or third hand account of, oh, I saw this. And then you have people sitting in judgment. Well, maybe you think you saw that because you're Black and you want to support, these officers being arrested. Maybe you didn't really see that. And that is why it is so important that every single person becomes an instant reporter, because that's what we are, right? That's what Cayman Road has been founded on. So yes, record those instances. They tried to intervene, and the police said, listen, you need to step back or we're going to tear gas you, we're going to shoot you, whatever. So they were threatened with arrests and other violence if they got involved. So the least that they could do, in my opinion, was actually to record the incident, because now that is a record, a visual record that you simply cannot argue with. So just like the situation in Cayman, there are multiple people out there recording. And I'm always flabbergasted and shocked when the police say, you can't record this. This is against the law. I've had it happen to me. Like, I've been in a public space and I've walked up and the police will say, oh, you can't record this. And I'm like, why? Like, you need to be able to question the authorities and do not believe everything they say, because most of these officers do not have a clue. So when they were telling me I couldn't record it, I'm like, why can't I? That's a right that I have. I have actually, during the Christmas season, my family was pulled over. We were going out one evening, I think just to dinner or something. I don't even know. And we got pulled over at a police check spot. They were doing checks. And so I was recording it as we got up to the incident. And you know what a police officer actually said to me? This is where people really need to know their rights. This police officer said to me that because of the new data protection law, I am not permitted to record them. I was like, what did you just say? Yes, there's this new data protection law in place. I'm like, sir, I'm more than familiar with the data protection law. And number one, what you're saying doesn't make any sense. Number two, have you read the data protection law? Well, this is our rights and this is what we know. And I was like, what? Are you kidding me? So let me understand this. You believe that as a public officer, as a police officer, in uniform and in public, you have some right to privacy and cannot be recorded by the public because of a data protection law. Think about that for a second. How does that make sense at all? Just common sense. Assume that you've never read the law, that you don't understand anything about laws. Explain to me how a public officer someone that essentially we are all paying a salary to, right, is out there in the course of carrying out their duties, serving the public. And in the process of that, they want to tell you that there's a new law in place that protects them from being recorded in public. I just had to shake my head. I was like, you are so ill informed. And I then informed the police commissioner that, your officers are out there obviously believing this misinformation and passing this on to the citizens of this country, and then telling people that they cannot record them for fear of them being arrested. One of these days, we're going to break down the data protection law. But media does not fall into the category of what would be, I forget the legal term that they use, but basically people who are in the business of collecting personal data miners or whatever they're called. So we're going to break it down because there are a lot of people who seem to not understand the data protection law. And this officer is clearly one of them. So the point again is, thank God for people who decide to record things, because sometimes you might be recording it just because you think, okay, this looks interesting, but you don't know what's going to transpire in that moment. So even when this officer told me, oh, you have to put your phone away, little does he know anything that happens around my vehicle is always being recorded, because I have got a front and back end dash cam that is recording 24/7. So I was like, okay, no problem. I put down my phone because I was not about to engage this ignorant officer in an argument when he doesn't understand something very fundamental and something very basic. So I said, no problem, officer. I'll put my phone down. My dash cam is still very much recording every single thing. Audio, video, the works. And I've got one in the back. So it's just unfathomable that if we don't have the evidence, it becomes your word against theirs. Right now in court, and I can't really go over, I can't discuss my own testimony because I'm still under oath and I'm still in the middle of this trial until I go back. I think it's on the 17th. But we had a police officer who got up and gave a certain he gave testimony about certain events, and this is how it happened. I'm like, actually, there's a couple things that's wrong with that. And so now I think, wow, every time the police comes to your door, you better turn on a recorder on them. It seems like you better. Because even when they give a statement and they decide to drag you through court, their memories are very flawed. And they remember things a certain way to help with their case and to build their case. And I have seen this time and time again. In fact, my very first incident with the RCIPS years ago, where they accused me of stealing this dog that I'd actually rescued. At one point, an officer called me on the phone. This was like the day before the trial was to begin, and said to me that she was wondering if I could provide them with some sort of evidence of how I had the steps that I had taken to look for the owner of the dog. And I said, why would I do that? The trial is tomorrow. Oh, well, she says to me, I want to just make sure that you're prepared and you're ready for trial. I was like, please. Thankfully, I had her in speakerphone and I had an eyewitness to this entire conversation. Because otherwise, nobody in their right minds would believe me. They'd be like, why would a police officer do that? She did it. And she said, oh, I just want to make sure that you're ready for trial. I said, officer, with all due respect, you guys are the ones who have me charged with stealing a dog I did not steal. You guys are the ones who are dragging me through the court system, scandalizing my good name all over the place over theft of a dog, which is something that I would never do. To me, that's equivalent of stealing somebody's child. And now you're calling me today to inquire about evidence that, had you done your due diligence when you received the complaint and had you carried out a proper investigation, you would know that it was impossible for me to have stolen this dog, because in fact, I did everything in my power to locate the owner of the dog. So had you carried out a proper investigation, you wouldn't be calling me now trying to backtrack the day before the trial starts to collect this information and then boldly lying to me in my face about, oh, no, 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 you just want to make sure that I'm ready. Why would the police care if I'm ready? You guys are on the opposing side here. You're trying to get a conviction. Do you really care if I'm ready? I mean, it would actually be in your best interest if I wasn't ready. But thankfully, I was ready and I had all of those things prepared. And the magistrate, the acting magistrate, was able to say that this was one of the most ridiculous cases that he had ever seen. And this was a complete waste of public funds and money on something that should have never ended up in court. So the ombudsman said that the conduct demonstrated by the same officer when interacting with the woman at the scene who was recording it did not comply with RCIPS Code of Ethics and standards of professional behavior. So again, this is what I'm telling you guys. When they're telling us, put down your phone, do this, you can't record, they can't tell you those things. The ombudsman's office found that force used by the arresting officer when he grabbed the motorcycle's arm and pinned him to the ground in order to handcuff him was necessary and reasonable to end the pursuit and effect the arrest. However, she was concerned that the second officer's use of his baton to strike the motorcyclist was problematic and excessive force. This use of force was unnecessary and unreasonable, given the suspect was on the ground and, although struggling to get up, was not strenuously resisting arrest. And she cited several tactical and situational factors which were not considered by the officer. This is what we're talking about, right? So here we are. Here we are again saying that we don't concern about what else is happening in the world or what's going on, but the very same things that the Americans are fighting, police officers who have gone rogue and who are just completely out of control, clearly indicates that, this investigation and this finding clearly indicates that we have some officers here who are prepared to do the exact same thing. In fact, we recruit officers from mostly overseas, and we recruit officers from Jamaica. A large portion of the police force are now Jamaicans. And as a result of that, I'm not going to sugarcoat anything on this show, and I'm certainly not going to lie to you. I know John is saying, why don't you sit? I'll tell you why here in a second, John, but the human rights record of Jamaica's police force is dismal at best. In fact, not only is it dismal, but they have one of the worst records in the world for violating people's human rights. So we have seen instances of them shooting pregnant women. You guys might remember that one from a couple of years ago. Assaulting and killing and shooting people who were already handcuffed. And there have been a number of officers, current officers who were still, when the incident happened, an officer, who have been charged with murdering a civilian in the carrying out of their duties. And so they don't have a stellar record. And I do think that it is interesting when we recruit officers from jurisdictions like that, and they come with their same attitude of, we don't care, by any force necessary, we're going to get, what it is that we want to accomplish. And what they want to accomplish is an arrest, because that helps their arrest record. And so I want to warn you right now that if you are easily disturbed by images, you should stop watching this program. because I'm going to give you an example of what is happening in the judicial system the world over. So I want to give you a warning. Please turn away, turn off the show, come back in 10 minutes, because there are images that I want to show you of a man in Jamaica who has been in police custody for 40 years. And there's a big report that just came out this week. We're the only media, of course, here in the Cayman Islands that covered it, because no other media on this island is that particularly concerned about what happens regionally, and definitely not really what happens in Jamaica. But the truth of the matter is, we have very close connections to the island of Jamaica. A lot of Caymanians have family members, a lot of persons here are of Jamaican descent, even. And in my mind, even if you weren't, you should be concerned about the atrocities that are happening in the countries closest to us. So whether it's Honduras, Jamaica, Cuba, even, these things are happening right in our backyards, literally. And the fact that we will import people from those countries and not understand their struggles and not understand, what is actually happening in those countries, I think is a real disservice. So this man, and again, I've given you fair warning that these images are not pleasant and they're not easy to look at. So if you're easily disturbed by images, I would invite you to now leave the podcast and come back in a little bit, maybe 10 minutes or so. So this man has been detained. And John says, I hear this all the time. We think this is all the world and we forget what is happening out there. And it's also happening right here in the Cayman Islands, John. We're going to talk about that here in a second. So John was asking, why am I standing? Well, I've got a standing desk. So when I'm standing, it takes a bit of maneuvering to lower it back down into sitting position. So once I've started the show, it's not that easy to then go to sitting. So it's kind of one of those things where I'm either sitting at the beginning and then I sit throughout, or once I start standing, then yeah, I'm standing for the full 2 hours. But sometimes I think to myself, John, we sit so much during the day, but even though I'm starting my morning in a standing position, that's probably a little bit of movement and exercise for the day. Not a whole lot, but every little bit counts, right? The other thing, of course, is because I'm doing this show just as I get up in the morning. One of the reasons I do stand is I find that vocally I'm able to get a little bit more coming out so you guys can hear me loud and clear. This week I've had no sinus issues, knock on wood. I woke up this morning feeling a little bit stuffy, but last week I had quite a tumultuous time with my sinuses. So I don't know if there was something in the air, what was going on, but thankfully this week has been free of those concerns. So there's a man in Jamaica who just died, and he was in police custody for 40 years without a trial. It seems like they have just put the man in there and forgotten about him. I know that sounds crazy, but that's exactly what happened. So we have the report thanks to our regional correspondent out of Jamaica. And this demonstrates yet another example of the atrocities that are happening all over the world, right here in the Caribbean, and right here in our own countries and in our own backyards. So this isn't about the United States of America. This is about Jamaica, and this could have very well been Cayman. So again, these images are difficult to look at. These are the autopsy photos. And so I invite you to, if you are the type of person that gets easily disturbed by photos, do not look. This is an 81-year-old man named Noel Chambers, and he died in what is being called deplorable conditions. In this new human rights report, it's an independent commission of investigations report. This is their quarterly report, which they shared on Wednesday. So Mr. Noel died in state lockup after 4 decades in custody without a trial. 4 decades, folks, is 40 years. So imagine someone, I see a few of you just joining us. Sonia, good morning. Florinda, good morning. I'm about to show some photos which are very difficult to look at. They're post-mortem photos. So if any of you, Sonia, John, Marshall, Lorraine, if any of you are particularly sensitive to photos or this type of content, I would advise you not to continue watching the show. And I'm going to bring up the first photo. So again, this 81-year-old man was incarcerated for 40 years, and it looks like they just forgot about him. They put him in jail. He never had a trial. His last court date was 1975. So he was actually detained for 45 years. Okay. The report is 42 pages in length. And it says they had, at the very beginning of the report, they quoted Martin Luther King Jr. saying, "Justice denied anywhere diminishes justice everywhere." And this should be our motto here in the Cayman Islands. This is why we need to comprehend and understand justice denied anywhere diminishes justice everywhere. So this is the first photo of this poor man who's been locked up for 45 years in state custody in Jamaica. Clearly, this poor man was not getting enough to eat, is the first issue. I mean, look at the protrusion of his ribs. You can count every single rib on this man. This brings me to tears, and this is horrible. Look at his pelvic bones protruding. If this does not make you understand that there's some serious injustices that are happening in the world, and not far from us, I don't know what else would. So the case of Noel Chambers. So on January 27, 2020, the commission commenced an investigation into the death of this man in custody of Noel Chambers of the Tower Street Adult Correctional Center. At the time of his death, Chambers was 81 years old. He was incarcerated on February the 4th, 1980, and had been in prison for 40 years without being tried. But I think he was in custody before that or something. So let's get all the details here. He was being held at the Governor General's pleasure, deemed unfit to plead to a charge of murder. Therefore, he was being held in custody without being convicted for an offense. So it looks like what was happening here is this poor man was probably unfit because of mental health issues, right? And not only did they have him incarcerated for 40 plus years, but look at the condition of this poor man. I will continue now reading from the report. It says there seems to be some confusion at the Department of Correctional Services regarding whether or not Mr. Chambers was convicted. Imagine, how can there be any confusion? Because the poor man has been locked up for 40 years and just forgotten about. The Commissioner of Corrections, in his report, states that Noel Chambers was tried and convicted in the Home Circuit Court on February the 4th of 1980 for the offense of murder. He was deemed unfit to plead and was held at the Governor General's pleasure. However, in the Commission's respectful opinion, he could not have been unfit to plead and convicted. So in other words, the two of those things do not even go together. Indeed, his commitment document by the Home Circuit Court has the words guilty of, struck out, and placed with unfit to plead. The distinction is important as it seems the difference between a person with presumption of innocence being indefinitely detained as opposed to a convicted person being so detained. Twice, Mr. Chambers received fitness for trial certificates from two different psychiatrists. The first was issued for him on October the 10th, 2003, which stated that the inmate has no history of a mental illness. Repeated mental examinations revealed that there's no mental disorder and he is therefore competent to stand trial. He is not on any medication and he's not a risk to himself or anyone at this time. And they continued to detain this poor man. Okay. The date for the second certificate is apparently 2009. Despite these certificates being prepared, there's no indication that they were sent to the court. Imagine the failures here, folks. Or that he was taken back to court for trial. Mr. Chambers' medical records further indicated that psychiatrists opined that he was fit to plead in 2007 and 2008. So at least on 4 separate occasions and on 2 occasions, an actual certificate was issued. They were saying that there's nothing wrong with this man mentally. He's fit for trial, and still, some 40 years later, the man has no trial. Evidence gathered also indicates that attempts by his family members and a human rights attorney to have his case heard in court proved futile. In time, his family grew disheartened with the situation. What was the immediate cause of death? His medical records show that on November the 4th, 2019, he was examined because he was not eating well, had poor vision and flu-like symptoms. He was admitted to Kingston Public Hospital between November the 21st and the 28th. So it seems like they don't even know the exact date that he was admitted to hospital. There is a referral on file from TSACC for KPH dated December the 15th, 2019, having shown a history of hypertension, diabetes, and cholesterol. However, there's no evidence on file that he was taken to KPH. Now, I'm assuming this is Kingston Hospital, this KPH, right? On the night before his death, he was found unresponsive by a medical orderly, taken to KPH, and thereafter was pronounced dead. The cause of death given at the postmortem examination was acute pyelonephritis. I'm gonna have to look that one up, but it means a sudden and severe kidney infection. So even though he was in deplorable condition, as you can see, he actually ended up dying from a kidney infection, which is probably something that under ordinary circumstances could have been treated. This is this poor man. This is the condition that he was in for 40 years at this hospital, at this detention center, the prison really. At the time of his death, he was in a deplorable physical condition. This is what the report says. His clothing was filthy, and his body showed evidence of chronic emaciation. He was covered with what appeared to be vermin bites. You guys know what vermin are, right? Vermin bites, live bed bugs, chink, and he showed signs of having bed sores. The family gave permission for the photos to be included in the report, which would be then be made public. So rats biting him up, bed bugs, chinks biting him up, bed sores, the overall obviously being starved to death from what I can see. Looks like he's barely getting any food. The overall lack of timely and adequate medical attention, in addition to his inadequate incarceration and poor hygiene, highlights serious breaches of his constitutional rights, the Criminal Justice Administration Act, and the Correctional Institution Rules. Folks, this is right here in Jamaica. If you are not understanding what we're talking about when we say that an injustice anywhere should offend us all, no matter where you live, you can imagine this being somebody's grandfather, somebody's father, being incarcerated for over 40 years. So the concerns that were addressed in this report, issues of long detention awaiting trial, the laws that govern how those unfit to plead are being treated, international standards for treatment of mentally ill detainees, the adherence of the Department of Correctional Services with the legislation, and the current conditions facing the mentally ill in custody, and recommendations to improve the current system. Wow. The report goes on to say, the case of Mr. Noel Chambers is not an isolated one. There are other mentally ill detainees. Now, it's interesting that they're referring to him as mentally ill because they've had, at least on 4 separate occasions, 2 reports and 4 examinations where mental health professionals said that he was fit, mentally fit to stand trial. So he should have had his day in court. But the report goes on to say that this is not an isolated situation before the courts and in the correctional system in Jamaica. There have been other persons who've been detained at the Governor's General or court's pleasure, and they gave multiple examples. Here are a few. LF, those are the initials of the person, has been incarcerated for 19 years for the offenses of housebreaking and larceny, as well as assault at common law. He was fit to plead, but still incarcerated for 19 years without a trial. MB has been incarcerated for 31 years for the offense of burglary with intent. Again, condition is fit to plead, 31 years. AM, who's been incarcerated for 45 years for an offense of murder. Again, the inmate psychiatric condition is fit to plead. Last court date listed was 1975, 45 years. SD, incarcerated for 38 years for the offense of murder. GW, incarcerated for 49 years at the court's pleasure. Last court date was 1970. That was before a lot of us were even born. EE, again, another person, incarcerated for 49 years for the offense of murder. Last listing in court was 2000. So 20 years later, can you imagine? There are people who would have committed a murder in 2000 who've already been released from jail. And here this man is in custody, these men, because there's multiple of them, in custody for 45 years, 38 years, 19 years, 31 years, and we're not even done. 2 at 49 years. Here's another one. MM for 44 years. IP, 43 years. KT for 44 years. Last court date, 1975. These detentions awaiting trial appear to exceed the maximum sentences, is what I was just saying, following a conviction or the prevailing tariff for similar offenses. These cases highlight systematic failures in reviewing indeterminate detention, and it is a clear breach of the constitutional rights of persons who are detained in inhumane conditions and or for an extended period without trial. It goes on to say that the mentally ill represent a vulnerable group in the prison population in need of urgent attention And the DCS reports that there are 146 mentally ill patients who have been detained at the governor's general or court's pleasure, unfit to plead. But interestingly enough, all of these cases that they mentioned were fit to plead. So what then is the issue? Of the 146 detained that they're talking about, there are at least 15 persons who have been incarcerated for over 30 years. And there's some of them that it says years unknown. There's 6 persons that they don't even know how long they've been incarcerated for. So paperwork has been lost, so people can't remember. I mean, I don't know how you don't know how long you've had someone in custody. You guys need to read this report. It's 42 pages. It talks about adherence to the legislation, you know, conditions that people are being held in prison. To say that this man was in deplorable condition, I think is an understatement. You guys have seen the photos. Imagine being his family members. Irvin says big lawsuit. I would hope so, but you know, they'd probably give them little to nothing for his life. And it certainly doesn't bring him back. I mean, he did live to be 81. So it's very, very sad. Hi, Mitzi, good morning. John says this is an extreme case of violating human rights. However, it has to do also with discrimination, white versus black, Caymanian versus expat, when you are intertwined, being part of the show and the job already, have the person, etc. So listen, human rights violations often run along the lines of the color of your skin, who you are. I am willing to bet you that of all of those persons that have been incarcerated for that length of time, there's not a single Caucasian person in that group. There's not a single white Jamaican, and there's probably not a single Asian Jamaican in that group. Because unfortunately, there is racism in Jamaica as well. And if you fall into certain categories, you're automatically going to be disenfranchised. The chances of you having access to education, decent health care, proper judicial representation, all of those things are diminished simply because of the color of your skin and that you are of African descent, you're a Black person in Jamaica. Just like the Cayman Islands, there are numerous cases here that we can point to. Very similar cases where the only difference is the person is a Caymanian versus the person is a person of color, and they get arrested for the same offenses. And then you look at the verdicts, you look at even if they're both found guilty, how they are eventually sentenced. You know, so while we sit back and try to pretend like we live in a cushy world here in the Cayman Islands, there are clear issues with how people are being treated based on the color of their skin and who they are. So Marshall says, from the time the rats and other insects, sorry, give me 1 second here. From the time the rats and other insects, I'm just going to read the comments. Something's blocking your comments. Bites you, it's not taken care of, then you know it's over from there. Rat bites alone can kill you. That's horrible. What happened to him? Beyond horrible. Beyond horrible. The years that those men are locked up awaiting trial are longer than the sentences, and that was the point. Most people are not getting 49 years for murder. I'm going to give the link to this report here because I think you guys should read it. Again, it obviously has those photos in there. So if you're a bit sensitive, take that under consideration. It's concerning. Let us spend some time talking about discrimination against Caymanians and Black Caymanians in the workplace, because this is a major issue that needs to be addressed. So, I'm just getting some messages here. You know, one of the people, okay, let me just focus here because these people are mad crazy here in the Cayman Islands with their prejudices. And again, we've imported people and allowed them to carry on in such a way and they have no, they can say whatever they want, right? They're never held to account for what they say and what they put out there and the strife that they create in our communities. Someone was just sending me something with George Novak, aka the Barefoot Man. Why is he in a Caribbean island? Because he doesn't really seem to like Black people. I mean, let me just be quite frank and honest. But he's not the only one. We see on a regular basis that people are engaged in hiring practices that are questionable at best. They hire persons clearly based along color lines, who you are, socioeconomic lines. So again, they tend to run along color lines as well. They don't want to hire Caymanians. That's a form of discrimination because, as I've said, Caymanians are a mixed population. When we started out, we got 50-50 in terms of the slave to free to non-slave ratio. So if we have a population that is 70% or 80% even Afro-Caribbean from a slave background, which I think it's more like 90%, there would be very few Caymanians that have been able to preserve from day one their whiteness, for lack of a better word, because somewhere along the line, people were mixing and mingling and having children and mixing up the gene pool. So having said that, I think it is interesting that when people discriminate against Caymanians, in particular when it comes to employment, we do not see the issues with that then being tied back and eventually linked to that of race. We are an African country, Afro-Caribbean. We may have some, mixes or whatever, but again, the foundation of who we are is 50% of the initial population were slaves. In other words, they were Africans. And so you mix that with the other 50% and you've got a mixed batch. And then you've got persons who come in who discriminate against us as a people. They refuse to hire us in their bars and restaurants. They refuse to hire us in offices, whether it's law firms, reception and clerks. They find all sorts of excuses. Oh, Caymanians are lazy. Caymanians don't want to work. They're troublemakers in the workplace. All of these things, when you look at it in a historical context, we can see where it's nothing new, first of all, the description of us are the same descriptions that they will use of people of color all over the world. So even in the US, oh, no, 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 we don't want to hire Black people because they are, they're lazy. They don't want to show up to work. They don't want you put these labels on people based on their race and who they are. And yet people will still sit down and say, oh, we don't have discrimination here in the Cayman Islands. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my experiences with discrimination here in the Cayman Islands. When I first came back to the Cayman Islands, obviously nobody knew who I was. And so I started to apply for jobs. And the resume reflected me living overseas. And so I would send in my resume, do my cover letter, sometimes even have the benefit of a phone interview or correspondence by email. And then when you go in for the interview, persons would be like, oh, we didn't know that you were Caymanian. Okay. In the early days, I'm thinking, why does that matter? I mean, except that as a Caymanian, am I not supposed to, if I'm qualified for the job, get first preference? You know? But I already started to sense this double standard. I was like, wow. Okay. Let me talk about the prejudices within our families. And one of the most interesting examples of racism and colorism I have actually experienced from a family member. As I've indicated, Caymanians have lots of diversity within our own family. So sometimes the diversity is a direct link of, maybe you are half siblings, or sometimes even the same mother and father, the children just come out looking different. Like one has just acquired some of the genetic components of the grandparents more than the parents. So they might be, if the grandparents are fairer skin, they may get that, fairer skin complexion, lighter eyes, and whatever. And so on one occasion, of course, I'm not going to name the person, I'm not going to say how they're connected to me. I actually had someone contact me about a situation. And in the course of, again, this was early on when I just returned to the Cayman Islands, so I was still trying to understand what was going on here. Like, how does Cayman operate, And so this person said to me that I had applied for a job somewhere, and they said, oh, they're not going to hire you because that company has a reputation for being very prejudiced. And I said, oh, wow, really? Now, the interesting thing about it is the person who was saying this to me actually worked at that company. And so they were saying, yeah, they're not gonna give you this, that, and the next thing, whatever. And I thought, well, why wouldn't they? Because you work there and you've got a good job and you've been there for, some time and whatever. And basically they looked at me and they said, well, they don't like to hire Black people. And I'm looking at this person going, but you're Black. What are you talking about? Colorism is what we're talking about here, folks. Being a few shades lighter in this person's mind, they understood, and probably up to a certain extent, rightfully so, that in that particular environment, they were still getting an upper hand over other Caymanians who were 2 shades, 3 shades, whatever amount of shades darker than them. Isn't that shocking? And they could say that to you, that, oh, they're not going to hire you because you're Black. And I'm looking at this person going, but so are you. And again, I pointed this out yesterday. I wasn't getting the difference between, apparently here in the Cayman Islands, there's different shades of Blackness. So you're not just Black, but you're high yellow, or you're a certain shade that is more preferred than darker counterparts. And I thought to myself, wow. And I'm not the darkest of the dark. So imagine what those poor people are having to endure. And my own family, my own Caymanians are telling me that a company isn't going to hire me because I'm Black. And I'm looking at them going, so are you. And in fact, the irony of it is, some of us in this community will do certain things to try to hide our Blackness. We cover, we keep our hair short because, sometimes in between treatments and stuff, the kinkiness starts to come out in your roots. As you can see, I got lots of grays and all sorts of kinkiness going on here. We don't want to show any of those things. So sometimes we keep our hair super short so that we can continually, brush away the kinks and process away the kinks. Using cosmetics to try to make ourselves look 2 shades lighter. Bleaching creams as well. Caymanians are bleaching, some of us, apparently. So all of these things speak to the fact that we've not accepted who we are as a people. And not only have we not accepted who we are as a people, but we are discriminating against one another, and we're allowing others, even in terms of employment, to discriminate against us as well. Marshall says it's not just discrimination against Black people, it's fat people as well. I remember in my last place of employment, my boss had discriminated against a girl because she was fat and he didn't hire her. Well, that's a whole other conversation, and that is a very real conversation as well. But I don't want to take away from, we've dedicated this entire week to the discussion of race relations in the Cayman Islands, in the US, and I dare say all over the world. And I don't want to take away from that in this moment, Marshall, so we can talk about fat discrimination and other types of discrimination at a later date. Giselle says they apply rules differently in the workplace. And that's true, again, depending on who you are and what color of skin you have. And I also saw that in some of the law firms in which I worked. Some of the secretaries could literally show up to work drunk, incarcerated, and don't you dare think of doing that as a Caymanian or as a person of color. There was a very different set of rules to be applied, for sure. How much you're going to get paid, even. So it's not just whether or not you're going to get the job. How much will you get paid? What benefits you're going to get. All of those things make a difference. How you're treated. Are you going to get a bonus at the end of the day, for example? So someone just sent me some screenshots here of George Novak, again, the barefoot man. He is an instigator at best. I hear him talking about the white Jesus might forgive you. Not sure about the Black Jesus. I mean, he thinks that he can say certain things in jest and that they're funny. And because they're funny, that doesn't mean that they're racist. And the truth of the matter is, a lot of people use humor to try to cover up and demonstrate how they really feel. So we go back to these persons with playing this new challenge, this George Floyd challenge. They think it's funny. That doesn't mean that it's not racist. Every single one of those instances demonstrates a lack of sensitivity. And the only way that you could think that this is funny, where a man has lost his life after 8 minutes and 45 seconds of struggling to breathe, means that not only are you the most insensitive person, but you are also a racist and prejudiced yourself. There's no way that you could have thought this through. I can't breathe. Go purchase a t-shirt and then reenact this and post it on social media for the world to see. And in your mind thinking, oh, this is just funny. This isn't insensitive and it's not racist for me to be making fun of the situation that has created riots around the US and around the world. Amazing, right? That is the reality of what we are dealing with the world over. Giselle says locals have to work twice as hard and are scrutinized more. Shawit says this is a topic that needs discussion. It is very real here. Look at the number of persons who actually tune in. If it was gossip, it would have been much more. Thanks for the discussion. And yes, I am very much aware that when we have these serious conversations, whether it's this one or even abuse of children, the numbers drop. If I was sitting here talking about you know who, Cayman's biggest number one client of NAU, we don't even want to call her name because that'll put her into tirade this morning. If we were here talking about her and calling her out for her shenanigans and foolishness, we would have 600, because we've had it before, over 600 persons tuned into this show. Because people love the gossip, they love the salaciousness, they love the ridiculous. And I'm not saying there's not a time and place for that and for calling people out on that level. But there's also a time and place, which is right now, for us to have these very serious conversations about what is happening in our communities, what is happening here in the Cayman Islands, the discrimination that we are having to deal with on a regular basis. So Marshall says, as long as you're qualified for the job, he doesn't see the color of your skin. Well, you're probably not doing the hiring, because trust me, it's happening all over the place. Public lynching, that's crazy. They're mental. This was a human being treated like trash. So sad. One of the things that people often do is when they talk about this Black Lives Matter, people will say, well, all lives matter. And they don't seem to think there's anything wrong with that. I did find a very interesting article about why it is offensive, if you will, when someone says Black Lives Matter, to respond with, well, all lives matter. And I thought that this article really gave a good historical context of how the Black Lives Matter movement started, and why when you say, because I don't know if some people don't get it when they say that all lives matter, that that's actually offensive to the Black Lives Matter movement, which means that they're highly insensitive. So I don't know if they don't get it or there's something else going on there, or that's just part of them being prejudiced. They wanted to play down, the fact that Black lives actually do matter. So this article that I found in the Scotsman, I thought was, this is Scotland, I thought it was very, very much on point. And I wanted to share some of what was shared in this. So it starts out by talking about obviously what happened to George Floyd and the protests that have ensued, all the footage that's circulating all over the globe. And it starts giving you some background on the Black Lives Matter movement. And I think a lot of us haven't really been paying attention. We just hear Black Lives Matter, but we don't know how it got started or any of the details. So this is a good one. So what is the hashtag Black Lives Matter movement? The hashtag Black Lives Matter movement was founded in 2013 following the acquittal of George Zimmerman. Now we remember George Zimmerman. He was accused of murdering Trayvon Martin, a 17-year-old African-American boy. Zimmerman had called the police telling them that Martin was behaving suspicious, and we see these phone calls now all the time, before confronting him and shooting him after a struggle. Zimmerman claims that he was acting in self-defense, and of course he got away with it. Black Lives Matter, by way of marches and digital activism campaigns against violence and systemic racism aimed at Black people, was then formed. In their own words, the movement was founded with the aim of eradicating white supremacy and building local power to intervene in violence inflicted on Black communities by the state and vigilantes. The movement was founded by Black community organizers Alicia Garza, Patrice Cullors, and Opal Tomiti, though they have highlighted that the need for locally led movements rather than national leadership. The hashtag Black Lives Matter gained momentum and support as a movement following the death of Eric Garner, so another one, in New York, and Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, both in 2014. Black Lives Matter cites the civil rights movement, the Black Power movement, the 1980s Black feminist movement, Pan-Africanism, the anti-apartheid movement, LGBTQ social movements, and Occupy Wall Street as inspirations for their activism. So these are all other movements that have occurred over time, right? So what does Black Lives Matter even mean? The term Black Lives Matters can now be used in reference to the movement, the slogan, Twitter hashtag, and assemblage of groups campaigning for racial equality. Critics of the slogan have described it as exclusionary. However, Columbia law professor Kimberly Crenshaw explained that the term Black Lives Matter as aspirational. Writing for Harper's Bazaar in 2019, Rachel Elizabeth Cargo said that Black Lives Matter is a rallying cry for a shift in statistical numbers that show that people who are Black are twice as likely to be killed by a police officer while unarmed compared to a white individual. Twice as likely. That is a statistical fact that you cannot argue with. And so when you say all lives matter, apparently not, because you've got a 50% head start if you are a white individual in America and the police arrest you. You're unlikely to be killed. If you're a Black man, 50% more likely to be killed in custody. Now, here's the point of this. Why is it that saying all lives matter is wrong? Opposition of Black Lives Matter has taken to responding by saying, well, all lives matter. The use of all lives matter downplays the disproportionate racism and and police brutality experienced by Black people. Kenanga Yamata Taylor of Princeton University told the New York Times that the idea that all lives matter has always been an assumption. Of course, all lives matter. Duh. He adds, the entire point of Black Lives Matter is to illustrate the extent to which Black lives have not mattered in this country. He used an analogy to highlight the issue of saying all lives matter, writing, if a patient being rushed to the ER after an emergency were to point to their mangled leg and say, this is what matters right now, and the doctor saw the scrapes and bruises of other areas and countered, but all of you matters, wouldn't there be a question as to why he doesn't show urgency in aiding what is most at risk? Okay. The clenched fist, what does that symbolism mean? So protesters holding up closed fists has been a regular sight at the hashtag Black Lives Matter demonstrations and protests in recent days. The clenched fist has a long history, originally used by marginalized groups worldwide experiencing oppression. It is viewed as a rejection of unjust authority and a show of resistance. When the Black Panther Party was founded in 1966 by Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale to challenge police brutality against the African American community, the Black Power fist was repeatedly used as a symbol of Black liberation. The Black Power salute was famously used by American sprinters Tommy Smith and John Carlos at the 1968 Mexico City Olympics Games, who both received medals. Donning black gloves, they raised their fists while the national anthem played during the medal ceremony. And I mean, it's just amazing that we've had peaceful protests going back 50, 60 years. And when now the peaceful protests, people are starting to riot and say enough is enough, we're like, oh, what's wrong with you people? Why don't you continue to just peacefully protest? Well, they've been peacefully protesting. People like Nelson Mandela, you know, have been peacefully protesting. Martin Luther King, he was assassinated, peacefully protesting. And that's what peaceful protest will get you. Anti-apartheid activist Nelson Mandela raised a fist in triumph when he was released from prison in 1990. The clenched fist was adopted by the hashtag Black Lives Matter movement following the death of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri in August of 2014. While police shot the unarmed Black teenager dead, witnesses alleging that Brown had raised his fist before being shot. The Black Power fist was then used to represent the hands up, don't shoot pose. Folks, that's just a little bit of history into the Black Lives Matter. We see that Meghan Markle is speaking out. Thank God she left her official role in the royal family, because otherwise she would be silenced and she would not have the ability to say anything. So she has indicated her absolute disgust with the situation and has shared that her absolute devastation at racial divisions and the death of George Floyd in the US, telling girls graduating at her old high school, I'm so sorry you have to grow up in a world where this is still present. Megan, told leavers at the Immaculate Heart High School in Los Angeles, I realize the only wrong thing to say is to say nothing, because George Floyd's life mattered. So of course we know that the 38-year-old Duchess recalled living in LA during the 1992 race riots, which again was also triggered by a senseless act of racism. And she said in a video address to the all-girls Catholic school on Wednesday that what is happening in our country, in our state, and in her hometown of LA has been absolutely devastating. I wasn't sure what I could say to you. I wanted to say the right thing, and I was really nervous that I wouldn't or couldn't, or it would get picked apart. And I realized the only wrong thing to say is to say nothing at all. Because George Floyd's life mattered, and Breonna Taylor's life mattered, and Philandro Castillo's life mattered, and Tamir Rice's life mattered, and so many other people whose names we know and whose names we do not know. Meghan Markle, former actress, the first mixed race person in modern history to marry a senior British royal, has been outspoken on racism in society before. She talked about having experienced armed men on the street and burnt out buildings during the race riots in California in 1992, after police again were filmed violently beating Rodney King. Well, Rodney King at least walked away with his life. She says, I remember the curfew and I remember rushing back home, and on that drive home seeing ash fall from the sky and smelling the smoke and seeing the smoke billow out of buildings. I remember seeing men in the back of a van just holding guns and rifles. I remember pulling up to the house and seeing the tree that had always been there completely charred, and those memories don't go away. I can't imagine that at 17 or 18 years old that you would have to have a different version of that same type of experience. So American history has been repeating itself for a while. She said they should understand it, but only as a history lesson and not as your own reality. But here we are again. Of course, we know that Meghan and Harry have left the royal family in an official capacity, largely because of the British the Brits, I guess, being prejudiced against her. And that was so obvious. You know, she was not readily welcomed into the royal family. She was welcomed into the royal family under, oh, we're going to pick you apart because you're a person of color. And there were things that she did that you'd find a correlating thing that Kate Middleton did the exact same thing. And the news headlines and how the media covered it and the spin that they put on it and what people saw as wrong from her. And they saw nothing wrong with when Kate Middleton did it. And oh, she's a gold digger, she's a this, she's a that. I mean, it's just absolutely disgusting. The comments and the things that people have said to her. And so she well understands racism. And I think so does Harry now that he is in a relationship with her and he saw how the British people did not accept her. Jake says people don't want to face reality. They just want to put it on the back burner and pretend. And that gets us nowhere. Marshall says, yes, all lives matter. That's a given. But Black lives are persecuted for being Black and being in the minority. Black people are target everywhere they go and how they look and what they're wearing. So yes, Black lives matter, especially when the brutality from the police is harder against Black people. Sawit says all lives matter is a protest to Black Lives Matter. It's a tease and a taunt. I agree. And if people don't understand that, I think there's something wrong with them. We've got Nautica Lone Ed says BLM. I completely agree. Long overdue. We all acknowledge this. Thank you guys so much for the persons tuned in on YouTube. And Shawit says exactly, peaceful protest falls on Black ears. The Supreme Court, let me just find this article because I thought this was super interesting. They're actually considering revisiting one of their own decisions and reversing it that gives police officers immunity from civil lawsuits. So let me just see if I can find this article real quick. Because again, they are recognizing some of the issues here. So let me just see, Supreme Court. So this is in the news. So there's something called qualified immunity. And the Supreme Court, basically the decision in place right now, it's a 50-year-old doctrine of qualified immunity, which allows police officers to be shielded. So it's called shielded cops from civil rights lawsuits, even in cases where a citizen's rights have been violated. So cops have this immunity policy in place for over 50 years. And now it's saying that the US Supreme Court may consider whether to revisit its 50-year doctrine of qualified immunity. So this is the cornerstone of our culture and near zero accountability for law enforcement, a criminal justice policy analyst said. And the doctrine was created by the court in the late 1960s. While the Civil Rights Act of 1871 gives Americans the unambiguous ability to sue public officers over civil rights violation, the Supreme Court has subsequently limited liability to those rights that were clearly established by law. And critics say the standard to near impossible, they've created a standard that is near impossible to meet. In order for plaintiff to defeat qualified immunity, they have to find a prior case that has been held unconstitutional, an incident with virtually identical facts to the one the plaintiff is bringing, says a UCLA law professor. And over the last 15 years, the court has made it more and more difficult for plaintiffs to overcome that or to go to trial. So it's an issue that has been in lower courts for some time. And it now looks like the predominantly white Supreme Court may, I think they only have one black member who's a man, of course, they may decide to revisit this decision. Lots of examples. A Tennessee man suspected of burglary was mauled by a police dog that was released by officers after he was sitting on the ground with his hands raised in surrender. A Georgia mother whose 10-year-old son was inadvertently shot in the leg by a deputy pursuing a suspect in the family's yard. An Idaho woman who gave police permission and keys to search her home for a fugitive wants to sue the officers who instead spent hours bombarding it from the outside with tear gas grenades that destroyed her property. And it turns out the fugitive was not inside. So not only did you give them permission and gave the keys to carry out the search, they still bombarded and tear gassed her house. In each case, federal courts dismissed lawsuits against the officers in light of the qualified immunity doctrine. So it turns out that it must be the case that is weighing heavily on the justices' minds. They're smart enough to recognize the direct connection between the doctrine of qualified immunity and the outrage over the lack of accountability for law enforcement motivating so many people to the demonstrations that we're seeing. Police officers accused of misconduct can face criminal charges, but convictions are exceedingly rare. And that leaves civil rights lawsuits as one of the few avenues for alleged victims to pursue their claims. And of course, with that being, a thing of being controlled because of this qualified immunity doctrine, it's not likely to happen. So in 2018 dissent, Justice Sonia Sotomayor warned that qualified immunity had become an absolute shield for law enforcement, gutting the deterrent effect of the Fourth Amendment. It tells officers that they can shoot first and think later, she wrote in a statement joined by Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So they're thinking now that they need to revisit this qualified immunity doctrine. So we'll see. So they may hear oral arguments later in the year. Obviously, anything that goes to the Supreme Court, it takes a while to even get to that stage. And who knows what the decision will be. Karen, good morning. Thank you for joining in. So we're just about done here. I want to show you guys one final video of the day. Let me just see if I can find it here. So this is the elderly gentleman who was peacefully protesting in the States. Let me give you the backdrop of information on this one. When police officers walked up to him and pushed him down, making him fall backwards and actually hitting his head. While I'm finding that, I think this quote is most appropriate way to end our week-long segment. Unfortunately, our guest was a no-show this morning. We've had a couple of guests that have had issues coming on the program. Just one of those topics that we get isn't easy to discuss. But we thought here on The Hard Cold Truth, the least we could do in honor of a man who lost his life over an alleged $20 fake bill, counterfeit bill, that they're not even sure if it was counterfeit, or in fact that they didn't even know if he knew that it was counterfeit. The least we could do is dedicate a week of discussion to this topic. And I found this quote amazingly true. It says, racism in America is like dust in the air. It seems invisible, even if you're choking on it, until you let the sun in. As long as we shine, we keep shining the light, we have a chance of cleaning it wherever it lands. So, you know, dust in your house, if you don't look at it from a certain angle, or you open up the blinds, a lot of times you can't see it, but it's there. And it is stifling and it is choking you. And that's what racism in America, according to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, said. These are the 4 men in this last case. And the irony of this is at least 2 of these men, in my mind, are not even white men. The one on the bottom right, he looks like he's black to me. The top guy is obviously Asian. But in the moment, they assisted in holding down George Floyd. And the one on the top left is now charged with 2nd-degree murder, and the rest of them with aiding and abetting the murder of George Floyd. Final video of the day is this gentleman here. Again, Buffalo, New York, they shoved down an elderly man who then lost his balance and hit his head on the concrete, laying motionless and bleeding from his ear. We haven't heard any updates on if this man is even still alive. He's a non-violent protester. And you have to question how in times like this, can the police continue to do this and not realize that they are indeed the problem?
He is bleeding out of his ear. He's bleeding out of his ear. He's bleeding out of his ear. Get him medic. What the fuck you walking up on me? I'm gonna be back.
Absolutely deplorable. You see?
He is bleeding out of his ear. He's bleeding out of his ear. He's bleeding out of his ear. Get him medic. What the fuck you walking up on me? I'm gonna be back.
You see that first officer wanted to stop and offer some assistance, and the officer behind him pulled him back and said, no, just keep walking, because they don't care. Just absolutely unbelievable. Just do not care. Folks, it's Friday. I wish you a wonderful weekend. This is our day to get out and about, so I think we're going to spend some family time together after this morning. I wish that you would all do that with your families, and please remember that this struggle against racism is not just America's fight. This is our fight as Caymanians as well. This is our fight as Caribbean people. And we have to stand firm with our brothers and sisters out of the US, because nothing will ever change for us or for them if we do not stand up. So I wish you guys the most beautiful and safe weekend, and we'll be back here on Monday. Any breaking news over the weekend, obviously, we will try to bring it to you as soon as possible. Have a good one.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Oh, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine. Oh, let it shine. Let it shine. Oh, Mlela. Oh, so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming. And the rugged red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
I can breathe. Please, the name of it. I can breathe shit.